Okay, I'm going to be sitting in for Dave Bell today, who is unable to make it, as many of you may have heard. I'm going to work through the slides that were prepared for him. And so what my job right now is to introduce the pediatric case definition to you, which is one of the highlights of the international conference that we held in January 2007 down in Fort Lauderdale. It's clear that children get chronic fatigue syndrome. You know that there's a wide range of individuals who are involved by chronic fatigue syndrome, ranging from little children all the way up into senior citizens. The problem is that there's only a case definition that's been developed for adults. And so lacking a case definition for children, many researchers were making up their own rules, or they were confusing chronic fatigue with chronic fatigue syndrome, and there was a multiplicity of definitions that were being used. So there was a lack of an application of any consistent definition. It was with that in mind that the IACFS, the International Association for Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, put together a committee of several individuals who are familiar with pediatric chronic fatigue syndrome to look at the various definitions that were being used and available, and particularly at the Fukuda definition. That's the one that the CDC has recommended since 1988, and the newer one to 2003, the Canadian case definition criteria, and try to work with that and make a pediatric definition from it. And so that was our goal. We worked on it for about a year and a half. And what I'm going to go through quickly is just some of the recommendations that we came out and gave you a little explanation of why. Now, first of all, just as in adults, we feel that children should go through a complete history, physical, laboratory examination, and so forth to confirm the diagnosis and to rule out other plausible explanations. With the child, however, it's really important to have both the child and the parent involved for obvious reasons. And in fact, it may be helpful not only to have the child and the parent, but also school individuals, church individuals, and so forth as well. Now, we decided to look at all of the case definitions that were available to us, but we tended to lean toward the 2003 case definition that was published by Carruthers and is referred to as the Canadian case definition. You know, the Fukuda definition, or the CDC definition from 1994, basically requires that you rule out other plausible causes for chronic fatigue syndrome. It asks you to ensure that there has been fatigue for at least 6 months, and then you have to meet at least 4 of 8 symptoms in order to be diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. On the other hand, the Canadian case definition, it works with symptom clusters, not just a symptom, but symptom clusters. So it allows a lot more symptoms to be included. And we thought that that would be very, very important. One of the things that the Canadian case definition suggested was that perhaps we could wait 3 months for a child to make the diagnosis rather than 6 months, which is the typical period to diagnose it in adults. There's some basis for that, which is quoted here. And the other thing is that it's generally recommended when using the new criteria that we've come up with, that if the child is 12 years or younger, that the criteria be filled out by a parent or some sort of a caretaker. If the child is 12 or older, however, to be filled in by the child. More than one person, however, can fill in the same form. Now, as in the Canadian case definition, there are basically 5 symptom categories that must occur, and they're listed here. This is basically an overview of the pediatric case definition. And you see it starts, the major symptom is post-exertional malaise. It emphasizes post-exertional malaise over fatigue or pain. The second symptom category that's required is non-restorative sleep. The The third, pain of some sort, myofascial pain, joint pain, abdominal pain. And then there need to be 2 or more neurocognitive manifestations, emphasizing the neurocognitive aspect of it, and at least one symptom from 2 or 3 subcategories, namely autonomic, neuroendocrine, or immune manifestations. Now, we recognize that there are going to be some patients who don't meet the clinical case definition. For those who don't have a minimum duration of 3 months, or all of the 5 classical symptoms, then we've decided to refer to that as ME/CFS-like. ME/CFS-like. There's a small number of patients who may not have pain as a major symptom, or may not have a major sleep disorder as a major symptom. And in a case like that, we would refer to those individuals as atypical CFS-ME and follow them along. Now, there's support for a number of different symptoms that we use in the new clinical case definition from reports throughout the literature, but specifically Rowe and Rowe in 2002. And this slide is to point out 2 of the major additions that we've made here. Children in particular are susceptible to have abdominal pain. And so based on the literature, we've added abdominal symptoms to the list of symptoms. And children are also very susceptible to autonomic phenomena. Orthostatic intolerance, neurally mediated hypotension is probably the best well known, but also a phenomenon that we refer to as symptomatic orthostatic tachycardia or postural orthostatic tachycardia. So we've added that as part of the diagnosis. Now, here are some major changes in the way the clinical case definition is used. For the first time, we've begun to rate severity. And in this particular scale, rather than just have the symptoms are present or not present, we've decided to get an idea of how severe they are by rating them on a scale from 1 to 7. 1 being not present, and then 7 being present in a severe form. And the case definition requires that the symptoms be either moderate or severe to meet the criteria. The next difference is that we monitor the frequency of the symptoms. The notion of symptoms that persisted or recurred during the past 3 months we felt was unclear, and it led to unreliability. And so now we assessed how often the patient has experienced symptoms over the past 3 months, again on a 7-point scale, from 1 being hardly ever to 7 always. Impairment is also addressed. And in this case, we rate impairments minimal, mild, moderate, or severe, where mild basically is that the child may still attend school on a part-time basis. Moderate would be that there's considerable effort and probable inability to attend school. And then severe would indicate that the child is housebound or bedbound. We also define remissions in this case, a full remission meaning that there are no longer any symptoms, even with ever, and the child is able to attend school. Now, the 1994 Fukuda criteria excluded a number of conditions, particularly psychiatric illnesses, and specifically gross psychoses, that is, inability to be in touch with reality. That would include schizophrenia and bipolar illness. So if someone had a severe psychosis, schizophrenia, or bipolar illness, they technically would not meet the Fukuda case definition criteria. Also, melancholic depression, which is a very severe form of depression, usually occurring in younger women, and eating disorders were excluded by the Fukuda criteria. These will be addressed by the new criteria for children, in that the psychotic disorders continue to be exclusionary, but things like the eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, that sort of thing, they would be excluded from the criteria only if that's ongoing and current. If it's been treated and the child is doing well, then that would not exclude the child from the diagnosis. And even substance abuse, melancholic depression, if they're treated and treated successfully, then it would not exclude the child from the diagnosis. Another area that's been somewhat confusing is a statement in the original case definitions that fatigue should not be the result of ongoing exertion. It's been criticized as being way too vague, and so we try to address that specifically with the new case definition. In other words, what we're saying is that an active child should be excluded. If you have a child that's attending school, that's attending extracurricular activities, who's able to participate in sports, able to march in the band, then that child will be excluded from the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. On the other hand, if the child is limited in these activities, or if he or she is exhausted by limited physical activity, then he would be included. Bottom line, normal fatigue does not limit activity. Normal fatigue does not limit activity. That's the bottom line. There is also a provision that fatigue is not substantially alleviated by rest, and we felt that that required some clarification too. It's simply stated that in chronic fatigue syndrome we expect that rest may provide some relief, but it does not completely eliminate the signs and symptoms of the syndrome. There is a criterion also that the illness results in a substantial reduction in lifestyle and the ability to attend school. And it may be very, very difficult to determine something like this. So it's sort of an arbitrary division also. Parents may not be able to remember the child's previous level of activity. Young children don't have a frame of reference. They don't know what it's like to be normal, and so they would have difficulties with it too. So where possible, we're recommending that other individuals be involved. Family can be involved, school personnel can be involved, nurses, doctors, school nurses, anybody who has a familiarity with ME/CFS and can comment on it could contribute to what kind of changes have been taking place in this child's activity level. Now, as is done in the Fukuda criteria, there are a number of instruments, or what you might call surveys, that we've recommended that could be used to further quantify certain aspects of illness. And for example, in the psychiatric field, there's a diagnostic interview for children and adolescents. As far as depression is concerned, there's a children's depression inventory and a schedule for affective disorders and schizophrenia, all of which have been validated in the pediatric population. Minimal work has been done in the area of fatigue in children. It hasn't really been measured. The problem here is that most of the scales that measure fatigue, they don't really take into account the severity of fatigue that we see in chronic fatigue syndrome. They're measuring everyday fatigue or daily activity fatigue. And so you need a scale that's more aligned with the more severe fatigues. And the one that fits best is the profile of fatigue-related symptoms by Ray. Sleep disturbances are addressed by the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, also validated for children. Pain is monitored by the McGill Pain Questionnaire. It's been reliably used for pediatric samples in the past. And for general health questions, a validated questionnaire would be the Children's Health Questionnaire, which measures 12 different concepts of health. Another area that we've instituted in the pediatric diagnosis is subgrouping, which has been talked about for years with respect to the Fukuda criteria and the clinical case definition criteria. It's been found that people with different backgrounds, with different profiles, if you wish, may have different responses to the symptoms that they have and the treatments that they receive. For example, people who develop chronic fatigue syndrome abruptly may behave differently than those who have a more insidious onset. Depending on the trigger that triggers it off, there may be a difference in response. There's a difference in recovery so far in people who are involved in epidemic cases, like we saw in Lake Tahoe, for example, as compared to individuals who had chronic fatigue syndrome come on individually and not in an epidemic situation. Gender may make a difference, age may make a difference, and the presence of fibromyalgia, just to mention a few different subgroups that might be considered. Now, obviously, we're hoping that the case definition that I've just gone over with you will provide a rapid, accurate identification process for cases with chronic fatigue syndrome in the pediatric age group. And we're hoping that, that this will allow more prompt, more accurate, and comprehensive treatment of children. And of course, with a specific case definition criteria, researchers will be able to compare cases from one group with cases in another group. So, what I'd like to do very quickly is just go through, I'm going to say it very quickly so we make up a little bit on time, would be to go through the definition, and you might have some questions that arise from that, and I'll try to answer them if there's any time afterwards. But basically the definition for children is that there should be a clinically evaluated, unexplained, persistent, or relapsing chronic fatigue over 3 months. Not the result of ongoing exertion, not substantially relieved by rest. It results in substantial reduction in activity and must persist or recur for those 3 months of time. There must be also post-exertional malaise or post-exertional fatigue.